Hello. Hopefully, is this working on the mic now? Great. All right. Yeah. So I thought I'd try kind of a little bit different version this year for a couple reasons. So one is that kind of my broadcast partner, Mike ABC, is still kind of figuring out what he's going to do this time around. So, if anyone wants to kind of be part of this series in the long run, definitely let's talk. Another is just that the different quick formats. There seem to be a lot fewer of them this year to kind of cycle through. It seems like a lot more of the gameplay is coming through different cap tournaments or some of the dailies and weeklies. So what I thought I might try instead is doing something where we look at the new content and just see kind of how well it plays. So something like the tier list thing Kidneys and I tried to do a little bit for the tournament edition last time around. So I thought maybe we'd try that as a way of kind of getting an idea of where the bronze and silver metas look like right now with the new build a lineup cards. And then maybe we can kind of go from there. So hopefully that means this also won't be as long of a stream because we've only got a couple dozen cards to go through, but that's always the intent, and it never quite seems to work that way. So yeah, I think that's kind of the plan is to go through these cards and use that as a way of seeing what plays. Also, as always, I just want to thank OOTP and the team there for turning on the drops. So hopefully everyone, even if you don't get anything else out of the stream, hopefully you at least get 5 nice packs out of it and get something useful for your builds. So yeah, let's take a look. So as I think people have seen by now, we had 24 new cards released this week. We had a dozen build a lineup bronzes, and then we had an additional dozen cards where for each of them you can unlock a silver if you go ahead and kind of pay up for the mission. If we look in the card shop, what you'll see is that right now it still is going to cost you probably something in the 3,000 range for each of these for the initial bronze. And then it looked to me, kind of the last time I looked at the prices, like it'll be another 2,000 to 3,000 points to turn them into a silver. So roughly speaking, if you wanted the whole set, you're looking at investing something like 50 or 60,000 points, from which you're going to get back a dozen silver packs and a dozen standard packs. So I think then the key question is, are the cards worth it? Do they play? And maybe if not, what else should we be playing? So I think maybe it just makes sense to go through. And why don't we start? Yeah, all right, why don't we start with Ted Simmons? We'll just kind of go in order. So taking a look at Ted Simmons, we'll start with his bronze card. And we see a few things immediately. So first off, clearly listed as a catcher. He's got a fairly low catcher ability, we can see. So really, if you're playing him, you're more going to be playing Ted Simmons for the bat. And overall, probably this also isn't going to be one of our best catching bats. So as an example, if we wanted to go with just like a relatively high overall bat catcher, just trying to pull up our list here. Actually, I should see if I actually have one of these before do the comparison. Do I have an Ernie Witt? I do have an Ernie Witt. Okay. Sorry about that. So this is still kind of an account that hasn't bought any points, so we still don't have a full card deck for comparison. But we can look at a card like Ernie Witt, as a comparison on the bat. So if you're just looking for a bat that's eligible at catcher, Witt's probably the kind of bat we'd be looking at for comparison. So what we see is it's a fairly different shape. Simmons is kind of a contact and BABIP heavy guy with some gap, and Witt's entirely the opposite. Witt is, I'd say a 3 true outcomes guy, but he actually is pretty good at avoiding strikeouts. But he's a 2 true outcomes guy. He has power, he has eye. So, overall, if we were to try to value these bats, in the current meta, where it seems like in bronze, a lot of people are running high pitcher BABIP arms, and so really kind of suppressing hitter BABIP, then Ernie Witt's much more the kind of shape that I think we'd expect to be successful. And I think we could imagine a meta where Simmons becomes more playable. If it turns out that the best bronze pitchers start to be, lower pitcher BABIP and instead are better at, say, control and movement, then maybe a shape like Simmons starts to get better. But at this point, I think we'd expect that at least overall Simmons is probably not playable. But then we do have, hold on, is there somehow not a way to, okay, well, I'll pull that up a different way. But then the big thing about Simmons is that he's splitty. And so if you just look at, if you look at Simmons just versus righties, then it's kind of an even stronger difference, right? Even more contact, even more gap. And so I think the key question then becomes, is that really enough to make this card a playable bat? Because we know it's not a viable glove. So, we can at least run the model, and that gives us some kind of answer. And unfortunately, the model answer is really no, and it's not particularly close. So Witt also is probably not the ideal catcher to run. I just kind of wanted to give you like an offensive comparison here. But really this kind of isn't going to be in the ballpark, because not only is this not playable as a catcher, but the bat's not particularly good even for someone that you can just put behind the plate. And, even for someone you can just put behind the plate. And at the same time, the bat isn't anywhere close to what you'd want for a bronze DH at this point. As we start to go through some of the other positions, we'll see kind of what some of the top bronze bats are in the game. So I think unfortunately that this Simmons is just entirely unplayable, even with the splits, where you kind of might think you could try to platoon him. Just the lack of catcher ability. I think this one's kind of going to be an F tier card. I suspect it's likely that some of the later ones in the set will be quite playable. And remember last year's build a lineup? There were some cards that were playable the whole way, like essentially every Kevin Brown was playable. But by the perfect level, almost every build a lineup card was not only viable, but a core meta card. So I suspect there will be some versions of Ted Simmons that we really want, but probably not this one. You said Witt hasn't worked out for your bronze team, and I can understand that too. So if we look at our model, the model really says that Witt also, despite having a bat, probably isn't your best combination at catcher. So to give you an idea of some of the cards that Warbot ends up really liking, so if you want sort of a more defensive option, then this Randy Hundley gets you 95 catcher ability, so he has all the defense you want. And although the bat doesn't kind of really stand out, this is actually in kind of the range of a typical bat for one of the bronze catchers right now. So this is probably, as a bat, this is probably only going to be like minus half a win or something compared with some of the decent bats. So Hundley's one option that kind of would be highly recommended. Also, actually, several of the iron players are quite doable. Like this Brian Downing, again, you get the catcher ability. The rest of the bat's not spectacular, but he has enough eye that he still is going to get on base. So this is probably a viable card. Similarly, the Iron Severid, again, now it's a little bit different shape. You know, it's a little bit more kind of singles and gap rather than eye, but you get the 96 catcher ability. So that one's probably a more playable card than any of the ones we're talking about. Another option, if you do want sort of more the Simmons type shape, so you want kind of a lighter on power and eye and more contact heavy option, then this Mike Redmond kind of is another option. This bat's obviously less splitty, but not so far off what you're getting from Simmons, but you're getting a much better glove. Let's see, Big Dumper is the only option. Actually not sure which card that is. I'm probably missing the nickname. Which card are you thinking of? Cal Raleigh. So Cal's another. This is kind of, you know, again, a power heavy card, but you've still got a much better catcher ability as well than you've still got kind of much better catcher ability. So this is also, I think, in the meta. So the ones War Bottle, you know, we'll kind of put in the top 10. Yeah, Redmond's up there. A couple live cards. So, you know, this Jonah Heim, again, you get even more catcher ability, some power, kind of a flatter bat. The live Zunino still has 82 catcher ability and power. And he's going to walk more as well in this card. So yeah, I think unfortunately the Bronze Simmons just doesn't seem to play, and that's partly because the shape just doesn't seem to fit the current meta, but also partly because there just are a lot of good catchers available cheaply. And I think if we go and look at the silver, so if we go back and look at the silver Simmons, we're actually going to see something similar. So this is a less splitty card. The catcher ability is a few ticks higher, so that's an advantage over the 60. Again, though, the card, so the card doesn't have eye and the card doesn't have power. And right now in the current bronze and silver metas, those seem to be the most effective things, because we're seeing a lot of players, we're seeing a lot of pitchers where between the pitching and the defense, instead of BABIP being somewhere around 300, BABIP is in the 220 to 250 range. And the more the pitchers and defense are cutting down your ability to get singles, the more a card like this just gets entirely swallowed up. So unfortunately, I think this is also probably just an unplayable card. I think we're going to have to give an F tier for both of the Ted Simmonses. And I think actually the same options we had in bronze are probably similar to your silver options as well. I also would be a little bit worried about the gold version of this card, the more that I think about it. Because for the gold version of this card, we've got this absolutely incredible mission card in Chris Hoyles. And in order to be viable, the gold is going to have to be better than this, right? So it'll be S tier at perfect. Yeah, I think there's a good chance you know, the way this set is designed, certainly if I were designing it, I would design it so that, you know, I don't think you want to release 12 viable cards at every tier and push everything out, but I think you want to make sure all the cards are you know, pretty impactful, at least at some point. So if his low-level cards aren't, yeah, I'm hoping this will be a really good perfect. But I think the current tier, probably this is not one of the cards you want to rush out and buy. Oh, by the way, before going on, I should probably mention something that Aster just announced as well, which is for the tournament lab today. So I was going to enter it, but I need a slot. For this tournament lab that has 20 more slots, there are going to be bounties today. So thanks to Aster for setting this up, as well as Nico for providing the bounties and putting this together. And maybe at the end of the stream, we'll try to build something for this, but I got to get a slot first, and I'm in a few quicks. So I'll come back and check this maybe after we do the next one. So, all right, why don't we go take a look at Eddie Murray and see if he's a little bit more playable then. Okay. So we'll start with the bronze card, which is again a really splitty bat. So we've got another of these guys who's a switch hitter, but at the bronze level, I guess it seems like at the end of their career they kind of, you know, lost the bat speed from one side of the plate but not the other first, or something like that. So, all right, we're looking at first base here. So I think first off, if you're going to at all consider playing this card, you're going to be platooning him. You're only playing him versus righties, and you're going to be looking at playing somebody else against lefties. So if you were thinking about this as a two-way card, then Warbot says it's, you know, on the fringes of viable, but ranks something like 8th. You know, as a two-way card. But we're really looking at this, I think, as a card that we're going to platoon. And so we're going to be comparing this specifically with our best bats against righties. So with that in mind, let's do a few comparisons here. Let's see. All right, so one of them that was just mentioned was Gallo. And there are two good Gallos, but let's compare him with the snapshot, I think. Okay, so here's your comparison. I saw a Gallo mentioned in the chat. Yeah, so I saw a Gallo mentioned in the chat. And this Gallo, first off, does exactly what you want a card to do in the current meta, meaning really high power, really high I, and not relying on balls in play, because that's what the current pitching and defense is swallowing up. And I think, again, with Murray, what you're seeing is kind of the opposite shape. You know, you're seeing really a BABIP heavy and a singles heavy guy, except he does have some power and he does have some I. And that combination is going to make him a little closer to viable. Hi, Kilk. So Warbot essentially is a model that tries to reproduce the calculation the game engine's doing. And so we try to figure out which players are going to be best in the current meta, kind of by taking their ratings, but really kind of running them against, say, if we're looking at first base bats, we want to run them against the pitchers people are actually using in bronze right now, rather than just kind of, you know, in a vacuum. Because everything in the game engine really is a comparison. You know, if you want to know whether a guy's going to hit a home run, you don't just need to know his power, but you need to know how good the pitcher is at avoiding giving up home runs. And if it turns out that everybody's running pitchers that are really bad at avoiding home runs, then a guy with power is a lot more valuable than if the opposite's true. So that's kind of the way we analyze things. and we're taking a look at the new set of build lineup cards. So yeah, so this Joey Gallo I think is a much better shape for the current meta. There is a huge difference in batting average as well that we'd expect. But I think we would expect this Gallo to be a monster bat. It's a weird kind of monster bat. So for example, one model for the pitching we'd be up against has Gallo hitting something like 181, but with a 341 on base percentage, 405 slugging. So that's a 746 OPS, but that's also a 401 WOBA. And for comparison, this Eddie Murray is going to hit more like 253. But, and with a 789 OPS, like 253, 322, 467, something like that. But that's actually a significantly lower WOBA because getting on base is so important. And that's actually another interesting discussion that I think probably we need to have as modelers at this point. So one of the ways to say it, when we calculate how valuable a bat is, I'll show it that way. So when we calculate, for example, what is the WAR that this hitter had? There's some defensive and base running component, but a lot of this calculation is coming down to sort of WOBA, right, to a weighted on base average. And the way that works comes from essentially taking historical values in different situations and kind of asking, okay, well, for example, averaged over all situations in Major League Baseball, what is it worth to have, say one extra single? How many runs does that produce? And I can give you, and this does change historically in different eras. Give me a sec. I'll put a link in the chat to give you an idea of what that looks like. So here's what this looks like for some of these earlier eras. And so you notice that actually as you change eras, the relative weights change. So for example, this only runs through 2010, the link I just gave you, but in 2010, an extra single was worth, 0.89 runs. A home run was a little bit over 2 runs. So a home run was a little bit more than twice as valuable as a single. But if you go back to, say, 1968, when it was just difficult to score runs at all, the value of a home run actually goes up. And that's a little counterintuitive because, of course, fewer runs were being scored. But one of the ways you can think about it, let's imagine you were playing like slow pitch softball. So we're going to score a ton of runs every inning. Basically, everybody that gets on base scores. What is the value of a home run in that situation? And now it's true that home runs, often will have a lot of people on base, and so that sounds really valuable. But on the other hand, those people on base were probably going to score no matter what you did. And so the value of the extra home run is basically a little bit over 1 run. You get 1 run because, you managed to score a run, but the people that you drove in were probably going to score without your help. And so the value of the home run actually went down a bit. So the WOBA calculation, both that is being done in OOTP and kind of the one that I built Warbot around because I'm trying to mimic what OOTP is doing, that's based on kind of a modern era. And as I mentioned, right now we're kind of playing in an environment where we have very low, here, let me load into a random bronze because I think I've got one of these up. We're playing in an environment where we have very low batting average on balls in play. I'll just load into one of these and take a look to kind of give you an idea of what this looks like. And note, by the way, that this is a difference between tournaments and leagues, because in leagues things are being normalized differently, so you end up with a more major league-like performance. But for the tournaments, if we just take a look at, let's see, I want team stats. Do they have, okay, well, yeah, you can get this from defensive efficiency as well, I guess. So kind of 1 minus this is going to be close to balls in play, but then there's some errors and stuff too. So what we see is that overall, typically we'd expect this number to be under 0.7. Instead, it's actually 733. And if we look at the teams that are being the most successful, they tend to actually be significantly higher. So they're actually, almost up at 0.8. Yeah, so here we go. We've allowed a 140 BABIP, for example, so far in this tournament. That's doing really well. But if we kind of scroll through, you see we're seeing some really low BABIPs. Okay, here, this is 7th in the tournament is a 209 BABIP. So we're in this environment in which, only something like 70% of the balls in play that would usually be hits actually end up being hits. And that means two things. One is that when we go back and look at these hitting profiles that are very dependent on getting singles on balls in play for their bat's value, they've just lost 30% of their value, and that's an enormous amount. So that's one of the reasons that these profiles that rely on walks and home runs seem to be doing a bit better right now. And this may be temporary because part of this is a question of which pitchers are being successful. If it turns out that the best pitchers start to be pitchers that are really good at preventing home runs and walks and not so good at preventing balls in play, then the pendulum will swing back the other way and we'll start to want to play hitters that have a higher BABIP. But right now, given that the current meta seems to be that people are focusing on preventing hits on balls in play more than preventing home runs or walks, that means that the Gallo type profile ends up being better. Hopefully that kind of makes sense. But the other thing that we don't fully understand in valuing this is in an environment of this sort, probably the relative value of a single or a double or a walk or a home run changes from these linear weights, just like you see it did historically in this link I posted. And ultimately, we're not really just interested in trying to figure out how to put up the highest WAR, as much as that's kind of the way we're analyzing it. What we really want to do is we want to put up the most runs. So that means we need to have a better understanding, what happens if you, I guess that's a better way to say it. So these linear weights assume that the other 8 batters in your lineup are just average major league hitters. But one of the fun things about OOTP 24 so far is there are a lot of hitters with really lopsided shapes so that you can pick a very extreme kind of lineup. If you want a hitter like Gallo, if you want a hitter like Gallo, you can pick a bunch of hitters that have exactly that sort of extreme shape, and they exist. But if you really have a lineup full of Joey Gallos, so that you basically only move runners via walks, home runs, and productive outs, you might guess that the relative value of these things also changes. And I think that's the big open question here, because we don't know we don't really know the answer to kind of which of these is going to be best. It might turn out that we discover that Joey Gallo's shape, that this is exactly the shape you want for the highest WAR, but that if you actually have a lineup full of them, the lineup ends up not being so successful. Or maybe it's the opposite. Maybe a guy that walks a lot, strikes out a fair bit, otherwise hits home runs, maybe that's actually even more effective in combination, especially because this card's also going to see a lot of pitches per at bat. And so we're going to run through everybody's bullpen if we have 9 of these. So I think this is something that I think still needs to be solved. And maybe OOTP even gives us the tools to do it, because we can kind of use the historical game engine to set up some scenarios and playing around with it. And maybe that would be a fun future stream. For the moment, though, kind of if we're just going back and looking at, Murray and so forth, at the moment, this card, certainly overall, is not going to do as well as Gallo, but even versus righty, this is a card that there's kind of so much in here. Like this 88 contact, that's a composite rating, but you can think about that, as like the batting average that you would get between everything. That's high enough that this is still a playable card versus righties and kind of in the fringes of the meta. Right now, there are a few cards that I think we would prefer. This Gallo, I happen to like Gallo better at third. But this Gallo might be one of them. But on the other hand, we can also look at a card like Roy Cullenbine. And this card's also probably going to be just a much stronger shape in the current meta. Enormous eye, 114 eye and 90 power versus righties is just going to be enough that this card should hit better than Murray. The other one that we're going to have to come back and look at, and we'll come back to this a little bit later, but just as a preview, let me find, where did I put him? There it is. This Berkman is also a first baseman, although eventually in the build a lineup, he's going to be somewhere else. And this card versus righties is much, much more viable than Murray because it has the right shape. So if we look at these two cards, you don't want either of them playing against lefties. But if you just look at them versus right, you see Berkman's a lot closer in BABIP. So he's a lot closer in terms of batting average. A little bit behind in power, but this 103i plus the gap power is enough that Berkman's going to be significantly better. And in fact, Berkman now ends up being, at least per Warbot, this ends up being the #1 card versus righties as far as a first base bat. He's still splitty enough that I don't think you want to play him both ways. I think if you want to play a single first baseman both ways, I'd rather play Cullenbine. But still, I think this Berkman is very playable at first base. So this is probably an A-tier card. And the Murray, although Murray, maybe isn't playable quite in the current meta because of these other options, it has the advantage that it's the best card of its shape at first base now. And because it's the best card with that shape, I think we could imagine scenarios where it would become very viable. Either the right kind of historical tournament or if the right kind of pitchers get released. So probably we should be giving Murray at least like a B tier option here. Okay, as for the silver, so we can go ahead and take a look at the silver on Murray as well. So now this is no longer a splitty bat. And this is also a better shape. So suddenly the silver version, instead of being a singles hitter, this is more of a home run and gap and eye hitter. So this is probably going to be much more the kind of shape that you would like for a card in the current meta. And, is this card viable? Well, first off, he's a switch hitter. That's a big advantage because you do get to play him both ways. This would be the #1 first baseman in the models, except that this David Ortiz exists. And, if you think back about what we just talked about in terms of, the power and eye, there's just so much power and so much eye in this card that this is something like 2 wins better than Murray. Ortiz really is kind of the S tier card here. Murray's also an excellent card, and really should be viable somewhere. But I think given that Ortiz exists, you're never really going to end up playing Murray at first base if you have the option to play Ortiz. And if you start to think about whether you can DH him, I think the bat's probably not quite good enough given some of the other options to DH, but it's close. So looking at this, I've got Murray as kind of about the third or fourth or fifth best bat. So very similar to Whitey Kurowski and again the build a lineup Berkman. If you kind of look at them as a DH. So I think this is again a really good card. It's a card that you can think about putting in the mix. So we'll give him kind of an A tier here. But because of Ortiz, this is still not going to be your top first base option. I don't know, is anyone in chat, or are you playing anybody other than Ortiz at first at this point with success in silver? There seem to be a few options. If you don't have an Ortiz, you could get Joe Hauser, John Jaha, Steve Bilko. So there are definitely some very good bats. But it seems like Ortiz is probably up there. I don't know, what's everyone else in chat running? Are you running anybody other than Ortiz? While I wait for chat, see if you got any other suggestions. I'm just going to take another shot entering the Tourney Lab so that we can show off the... Here we go. All right, so we're in the Tourney Lab. Actually, maybe we'll come back at the end and build a team for this on stream. But there are 9 more spots in the Tournament Lab, and there are going to be bounties on a few of us. So feel free to jump in and knock one of us out if you're interested. Yeah, all right, I'll jump in that. Since it's already over, if it were at 32, I didn't want to jump in this. But if it's already at 33, I think I can jump in, right? Chat, if it turns out this ends up back at 33, let me know and I'll drop out of it. All right, should we go take a look at some... Let's go take a look at Zobrist in the second base option then. All right, so we got... As soon as this loads, there it is, okay. All right, I think we got that to load. So, second base. So second base is one where I think we might have expected that you could get a good meta card because there have been fewer options that really seem to have exactly the right shape for the current meta. So I think the option that I had been running most often had either been this Mark DeRosa, where this is not really sort of a homer and eye heavy guy. This is he has some eye, but this is more more mixed in terms of the contact profile. Yeah, so oof, we can actually go build one on stream if you want after this. We got an hour before it fires. But it's a low cap, so it means you have to make some tough choices. Yeah, so this DeRosa is one where it's maybe not quite the perfect profile. It's still a really nice card because he plays 4 positions. This is a good card for building a team around. But I think that's one that that seems to be found pretty commonly. I think I've seen a few people playing Luis Alicea. I don't think I have that card on this. I don't, but we can take a look. So that's also kind of an even more eye-heavy guy, with 84 range at second. There isn't really one of these sort of power plus eye bats, though. So, probably the closest is actually an iron card. Is actually this Iron Schimpf, if I can spell. There we go. Is this Iron Ryan Schimpf, and this is exactly the kind of profile that we've been talking about. So this card is also definitely viable in bronze. Okay, so kind of compared with that, where does Zobrist end up? Let's take a look at Zobrist. So the good news is this card has a lot of eye, for sure. So that already makes him a bat that we'd want to think a little bit about. I think like the other bronzes we saw, he's much better one way than the other. He's much better against lefties. But there are two problems with the card. The first is, he doesn't really have power or kind of BABIP. He has some BABIP versus lefties. But walks are probably the most important thing you're getting out of this card. And the second is this 58 range. Really this should not be a second baseman. And I think the combination of the two just pushes him a bit too far down the list. So Warbot has this card as the 4th best bat, but 12th best second baseman. And would much rather have you play somebody like, so we saw, for example, this, Schimpf still has 69 range. So you're still kind of getting a lot more range. Alisea has 84 range. DeRosa, which is more your offensive option. Where is it? There it is. DeRosa still has 76 range. So I think that's the problem, is that this Zobrist doesn't play second base well enough to be a second baseman. And then when you try to put him elsewhere, the bat's not good enough. If he were, for example, if instead of just qualified to learn shortstop, if this card, had a little bit of shortstop position rating so that it would be full when we, so you could at least kind of have him there in an emergency, maybe that would make it more viable. But even though the bat's playable, I think this is probably like a D tier card at best. I can't see this ending up in the meta, even if we kind of change the pitchers we see. You missed Bert Campaneris. We all missed Bert Campaneris. He plays everywhere. All right, let's see what we got here. All right, so then we've also got a silver Zobrist, and what I'm really hoping we get out of Zobrist is a card that really does play like 5 positions as a perfect, and if so, he might be viable in the meta for quite a long time, because often perfects, because they're sort of at that stage of their career, really only play like one position. But okay. As for the silver Zobrist, there's again not a lot to really like about the card. So, the good news is, again, it's kind of, at least there's some eye here versus righties, but there's no power. And again, there's really no defense. And the card doesn't play short. I mean, it's funny because he gets this 80 rating at second base, which sort of makes it look like this should be an excellent card. But it's only 67 range, so the rating's almost entirely coming from not making any errors. And the way that that's weighted in the overall, kind of in this overall number in OOTP, I don't think is really representative of the value of the card. So I think this card, again, it's just the same problem. This doesn't have enough range to play second, and the bat's not good enough to put him anywhere else. So you can't really could you put him in the outfield? Well, he's not a great defender, but again, now you're comparing him with corner outfield bats, and there are a lot better options there. So I think this one, even more so, just is not going to be a viable card. I do think we're going to see some good Zobrists later on, as you get one that can play all these different positions. But unfortunately, this one isn't it. So, all right, let's go on. What do we got next? Third base. Let's take a look at Chipper. So Chipper, we remember, had an absolutely essential bronze card in the last cycle. So let's take a look at his bronze card this time around. And what we see is a really good bat. So first off, the bat here, we've got 103i. So that immediately is something we're going to pay attention to. It's not quite I plus power. It's a little bit more balanced bat in terms of the rest of it. So, you're still going to be comparing this Chipper against some of the other cards we were talking about. So who are some of the other third basemen that we can compare this against? Well, one's going to be this Joey Gallo. And you see the difference in the bats is that Gallo hits more homers and Chipper hits more of everything else. And again, they're pretty different shapes. So what we're asking is, are 20 points of contact and 27 points of gap worth enough to make up for 49 points of power? And they're both a little better against righties, but in terms of righties, the splits I just mentioned get even bigger in both ways, right? So this is where you just kind of have to have a model and look at the different pitchers. And the answer seems to be that they come out very close to even when you kind of combine everything. As for the glove, well, neither of these is really a card that you would like to put at third base. Chipper's a very slightly better third baseman defensively, but really neither is a card that you're happy there. And yeah, okay. So in the end, Gallo's bats may be a hair higher. Chipper is a little bit higher defensively. So Warbot has Chipper as a little bit better than Gallo overall. But both are very viable. So KK asks you, do you consider the void K? So this is something that people that have been on this stream before, kind of have already heard this. A void K is generally not a helpful thing on a card, because if you have a higher avoid K, what it does is it essentially makes your overall higher, which means the card is competing against a tougher class of opponents that doesn't really otherwise add a lot of value, because what you really end up caring about is how often they have different outcomes. So for example, often what will happen is you'll have a card that has low avoid K, but then so they strike out a lot, but in return, they just have a higher BABIP. And so they end up kind of reaching whatever batting average you care about. And it's probably the batting average that you care about more. Another way to think about it is, if you know a card is going to make outs, do you care whether they're strikeouts or groundouts? And you probably care slightly, but you care a lot less than almost every other difference in the card. So in general, these cards with low avoid Ks are going to be fine, but particularly so for Gallo, because when Gallo strikes out, the way the game engine works, it kind of calculates these three true outcomes first, and then if none of them gets tripped, then it figures out what happens on a ball that gets put in play. So Gallo's low avoid Ks aren't hurting his eye, and they're not hurting his home run power. The only thing those strikeouts are doing is they're taking away from any hits he might get on balls in play. But wait a minute. he gets almost no hits on balls in play. And in the current meta, where pitchers are also really good at preventing hits on balls in play, he gets even fewer. So I don't think he's hurting you when he strikes out. Okay, so Kingman, that's another good one. So yeah, so if we look at our top third baseman, what we find is there are three that are almost identical in terms of value. So Warbot's order, but they're very close, is Chipper and then Kingman and then Gallo, and then there's a gap. Moustakas below that, and then another gap, and then you're down at like Wayne Gross. You could play DeRosa there, Willie Green. So we just looked at Chipper and Gallo, and we found that they were two cards that sort of had no glove, but in return, they kind of were all bat. Kingman, as much as it's funny to talk about him as a defensive card, that's actually what Kingman is. So if you compare Kingman against, say, Gallo, the power is comparable. Kingman very slightly higher. Both of them have no contact. Both of them strike out a lot. But the difference is Gallo has this extra 30 points of eye. So that's a huge difference in the bat. But then in return, there's an enormous difference in the glove. Kingman is actually an elite defensive third baseman, despite being a low iron. Joey Gallo, like Chipper, is much more in the mold of a guy that can find third base on a map and you can point and tell to stand there. So, what the current model's giving is that the difference in these bats is about 2 wins, and the difference in the gloves is also about 2 wins. And so Kingman's also in the mix. If you had to play one of them at first base, then at first base you would have to just go with the bat, I think. But at third base, it looks like the defense makes it about a wash. I see Kingman was a third base in his first 3 years in the league, you're saying. I hadn't thought of him as a third baseman, but then I guess I only remember him from the tail end of his career. So I think Chipper's, pretty close. As for which of these you'd run, well, this comes down to one of these things I was mentioning earlier, where one of the problems is we don't really understand yet how the value of defense changes when you change BABIP. Because when you have a much lower BABIP environment, when you have a much, I'll get back to Moustakas in a second. So when you have a much lower BABIP environment, well, then the question becomes, if you have a third baseman, say, that has a little bit lower range and is going to allow more doubles, how much do those doubles cost? And in a very low BABIP environment, you might guess that maybe it's not so bad to allow doubles because there aren't going to be as many runners on base. So therefore, maybe the value of his defense drops, a little bit, and you'd rather play Gallo. Or maybe the answer is that there's still enough singles that actually doubles are much more efficient at scoring runs. That's what we see, for example, if we look at 1968, as an example. We saw that in 1968, a single was worth 0.91 runs and a double 1.35. Whereas in the modern era, the single is comparable, but a double is a little lower. It's more like 1.27 or something. So what we found is that kind of in a tougher era, actually the double was more valuable. And if it goes that way, then Kingman's defense is actually a little more important than we're currently expecting. And so then you'd prefer Kingman. So this is something I think you kind of have to figure out, experiment a little bit. Think also a little bit about your pitching staff. Are you running a pitching staff where you particularly care about third base defense? Think about your sliders, how often you're going to be guarding the lines with him. So both of these are going to be viable, and I think as is Chipper. Asking if you guys, so Z Pharaoh, the Warbot model is not available externally, and you really couldn't run it as a spreadsheet because the basic idea is that kind of the way this game works, cards aren't exactly good or bad in a vacuum. Like if you ask, would I rather, let's even think about batting, you know, would you rather bat Gallo or would you rather bat Chipper? Okay. Well, the answer should not actually be either of these. The answer should be it depends on the pitcher. If you have a pitcher, you know, who is incredibly high home run prevention, but incredibly low pitcher BABIP, so a lot of balls in play, you know, end up being hits, then you'd much rather Chipper, who gets more balls in play and turns them into hits, but relies less on hitting home runs. On the other hand, you know, the opposite kind of pitcher, you'd much rather have Gallo. And so you can't really just sort of take a spreadsheet and say, like, these are the best cards, because they're the best cards against specific things. And they're the best cards, you know, you could work out what the best cards are against, say, the current meta. But the meta is constantly changing. Partly because new cards get released, but also partly because managers get smarter and managers start to realize what's working and what isn't, and their tactics evolve. Let's see. All right, Moustakas. You mentioned Moustakas. We can pull him up. Sorry, I'm trying to get through the chat. Just in order. Moustakas. Where is he? Here's Moustakas. So if we compare Moustakas, you're asking about against, say, Gallo. Well, what we see is that Moustakas similarly has a bat that's probably more similar to Chipper. So actually, yeah, Chipper probably is the better comparison in terms of shape because they're closer in terms of kind of having this more balanced profile. But the difference is just that like 39 points of I is worth a ton. That's just a lot of base runners compared with the extra value that you get for this power. So that's why Chipper's bat ends up being a bit better. Let's see, is the bronze low BABIP environment counterable? And is it driven solely by the pitchers that are being run or also that people are running low BABIP hitters? I think it's both. I think people are running pitchers that suppress BABIP. Managers are responding to that by running hitters with low BABIP and trying to be good at everything else. And so the two certainly give you this low BABIP environment together. So if you want to know whether you can counter it, I guess the question would be the question becomes sort of how much BABIP do we need to kind of overcome, you know, less of everything else. You know, my general sense would be that as long as everybody is running pitchers that focus on suppressing BABIP, it's unlikely you're going to find cards that have such a high BABIP that you can just kind of smash through the pitchers anyway. So my sense would be the more everyone kind of crowds into running high pitcher BABIP guys, the more you can punt on BABIP, and in particular, the more you can ignore things like avoid K. You know, so maybe the better way to counter it would be to realize that the pitchers people are running in return tend to be low stuff. So you can completely ignore some of the strikeouts and things like that. Another thing you could do to counter it is to think a lot about your sliders. So in a low BABIP environment, you're less likely to wait around for a single to score runs. That's going to make it a lower scoring game. But in a lower scoring game, there are tactics that become viable that didn't used to be. So for example, the less likely a base runner is to score, the more advantageous it is to try to send them to steal. You know, the more advantageous it is to be willing to give up an out to bunt a runner over in some situations, because you were more likely to make an out anyway if you didn't bunt. So I think I might try to counter it with the sliders instead. Let's see. Branch asks, do you run batters versus specific pitchers? Yes, or at least what we do is we run them versus kind of an aggregate set of pitchers. We run two things. One is the main one is we kind of run pitchers and batters and optimize them against each other to figure out where we think the meta should go. I think that's one. The other is we try to just take a list of pitchers that are currently in the meta and run them specifically against those. But the first is usually the one that I present on stream, because that's a better guess for where the meta will end up once everyone kind of has had a chance to find the best cards. Let's see. So is having a mix of card types an effective counter? So where a mix of card types would become an effective counter would be if you found that you had managers with really different ideas. So for example, let's imagine that some managers only run left-handed pitchers and some managers only run right-handed pitchers. How do you counter that? Because if you kind of load up on one, you're hurting yourself against the other. I think that's where a mix of card types would be an effective counter. I think what we're currently seeing in bronze instead is not that you're seeing a lot of different strategies, but that you're seeing very similar pitching strategies. And so if it's very similar pitching strategies, I don't think you want a mixed strategy in response. I think you just want to hammer that one strategy. But I do think that if you find that the meta involves a bunch of different strategies, that's where your idea of a mixed strategy would become really valuable. Let's see. Yeah, best of 5 and best of 7 quicks. I think you would get a better idea of which strategy wins, essentially. Having only these double elimination quicks, that definitely changes kind of what you're willing to do, I think. All right. Anyway, so right, as far as giving a grade, this is, I don't know. This could either be an A tier card or an S tier card. It's kind of somewhere in between. All right. I like Christophorus's answer. We'll give him an A. We'll give him an A plus. We can't quite call him S tier, I guess, but really close. All right. And as for silver, we do also have a silver chipper as well. So let's take a look at that one. So this one's also a 79. So this is kind of a splittier card. And silver's been a funny place because there hasn't really been a wonderful third base option in silver to this point. So I was kind of expecting that this is a place that the silver chipper really should play. In fact, I mean, to give you an idea, I have at times played Kingman just in silver and felt that that's kind of been an okay decision. So there really haven't been a lot of silver specific options here. But let's take a look at a couple of them. Actually, sorry, so one is this. Actually, I'll put the comparison up. Sorry about that. So one option is Whitey Kurowski. This is also your sort of a similar DH masquerading as a third baseman. So this chipper is a little bit better defensively, not just than Kurowski, but a little bit better than the bronze chipper. But this is still really a DH masquerading as a third baseman, kind of in the same way Kurowski is. I do think it's worth mentioning that as much as both of these are really bad defensively, Chipper is much better defensively than Whitey. There's a huge gap here with these, 6 points of arm, 16 points of range. So that's a huge gap. Okay, now if we look at the bat, well, Whitey's bat is here just going to be better. You got 13 more points of eye, And we know that that's the one thing that's completely durable through a low pitcher BABIP is they're still always going to walk guys. He's got more eye. He's got more power. It's also a less splitty bat. So, you could imagine using chipper, say, just against lefties, and then it's closer. The only thing really that chipper's better at than Kurowski is avoiding strikeouts. But even that's not so valuable because all of Whitey's value, just still is going to exceed chipper. So I think if you're going to run a bat first guy at third, Chipper is the second best option behind Kurowski. And in principle, you could even think about trying to platoon them. Although, Whitey Kurowski is actually also a righty with some reverse splits, which is nice because that means that he's never really going to suffer from a platoon point of view. So I think of the two, you're probably always going to play Kurowski. You could still go back and play Kingman for sure. Couple other options at third here that are worth looking at, and there really haven't been a bunch. So one option is this Greg Nettles. So the bat's just power, but this is also a really good defensive third baseman. So you can kind of think about this Nettles as being the competitor for Kingman and, kind of the first time that you have a card that, has more like a Kingman-like profile, but is better. So that's probably the card that crowds out Kingman. Another option that could be in the mix, and these are a little bit lower tier, another option that could be in the mix, sorry, not that Longoria, that one would certainly play, but is this Topps Longoria. So not quite as good defensively as your good defensive options, but much better than Chipper and Kurowski, and with a very playable bat. But there aren't a lot of wonderful options. I mean, to give you an idea, for a while, I was actually running this Ned Williamson, who has an excellent glove, has some eye, and then not so much else. I mean, the gap power is nice, particularly for some of the era tournaments. Maybe that's viable. But there aren't a ton of options. So, I think Chipper's in the mix, if only because there aren't a lot of third base options. I think you'd rather run Kurowski or you'd rather run some kind of more defensive option. I don't know. Anyone else? Anyone running Ron Say? I think that's kind of another, in between glove and kind of in between bat. That's kind of a true outcomes guy. I feel like there aren't a lot of good options, though. I feel like third base around bronze and silver, and particularly silver, this is the place that a new release is almost certainly going to change the meta. Because I feel like sort of every option here is still flawed, and that's why you're seeing Kingman's playable. But, all right, with that in mind, he's sort of viable. I mean, we'll give him, he's like an A or B tier. We'll give him like a B tier here. All right, let's go on to shortstop. See, I thought this was going to be a short stream. It never seems to work out that way. All right. So, shortstop, we got George Davis. So, here we go. We got an interesting card here. Certainly, again, we've got the bat that really, is a switch hitter but shouldn't be. Not a ton of eye compared with some of the ones in the current meta, but viable. But the big thing is that this is an excellent glove at short. And you get some base running value, and you do get a lot of BABIP versus lefties. So particularly in some of the era tournaments where even if pitchers are trying to suppress BABIP, if the only play, if you're running a dead ball tournament and the only way you score is with BABIP. You're still going to be looking at a card like this because you have to find the BABIP from somewhere. So, all right. So then the question is, can we play him? So Warbot has him overall around 7th, where most of that value is really coming defensively. To give you an idea of some of the comparisons here, let's see. Why am I not finding? Ah, it's because I don't have the card. That's why. Okay, well, so we'll give you Woody Held as one comparison. So here you get a lot more pop. More home run power, but even the rest of the bat is overall just going to be better than Davis. So you get a significantly better bat. And then, although Davis's glove looks better, these 3 points of range are pretty valuable. So you're probably getting a comparable glove with Woody Held as well, and a much better bat. So I think there's a pretty significant gap between a card like Woody Held. Let's see, another example. Realized I don't actually have the card. Probably should buy a Herman Long. All right, here you go. I will put up a buy order for Herman Long at last 10 because I probably should have one anyway. But this Herman Long, again, you get 97 range. So the rest of the glove's not as good, but it's more range, and you kind of get more power and more eye than George Davis. So I think that's going to be like your better option. So is there any scenario in which George Davis is really a card you get excited about playing? I think there are a couple, honestly. So one is some of these dead ball tournaments where the power gets suppressed and you care a lot more about BABIP. That's going to make Davis a little bit more viable than before, and then he's going to start to be competitive with these guys because he's already kind of on the fringes of the meta. He would have been like a B or C tier card. I think that's one. The other is there's at least one bronze floor cap that's a daily, and I seem to remember there are a couple other formats where something like a bronze floor is useful. And in that format, George Davis at 60 overall is coming for free. So now his comparison instead is going to be with this Al Bridwell, where for Bridwell you get 101i, so you kind of get a bat that's going to be more BABIP, more contact. Neither of them has any power, so Bridwell is going to be the better bat. But now there's an enormous gap where Davis is much, much better defensively. So in some of these cap tournaments, I think that's where George Davis is going to be playable and probably is going to be in the meta for a while because he's essentially a free card that gives you excellent defense in anything with a bronze floor. And that probably makes him playable. So I think this probably ends up being an A tier card just for the cap formats, even if you're never going to play, maybe more like a B tier card. But definitely kind of viable. I think much more so than you would expect, just given what's overall on the card. And we can ask the same question then about his silver, because his silver is 70 overall, which again means you're getting this card for free in anything with a silver floor. But now we've got another difference here, which is this card has 105i, 106 versus righties, 102 versus lefties. We still don't have power. This is actually a worse card defensively than the bronze George Davis as well. Significantly worse. We're down to 82 range instead of 94. But this is just a much better bat. And when we start to compare it against the top options at shortstop, this is going to be right in the mix. So I'll give you a couple of comparisons. So probably the most similar in terms of shape is going to be this Tournament Eddie Lake, which is a card that Warbot really liked from day one. And you see that these are almost identical in terms of shape, but George Davis is just a little bit better with the bat. So you're getting a little bit more offensively. And then defensively, this 90 range is enough that Lake's glove is going to be a little bit better. So you get the better bat for George Davis, you get the better glove for Lake. Overall, they're going to be pretty close. But these are going to be kind of right in the mix, and I think these are kind of two that are entirely viable. Now, it's interesting that day one, with that set, Eddie Lake was the top shortstop in Warbot's model, but he's no longer the top shortstop in Warbot's model. Now it's instead. Okay, that's not the way to do it. Now it's instead Bill Hall. And, you know, nothing changed, of course, about these two cards. They had both been out the whole time. The difference, you know, essentially what changed is the pitching. And with the different pitchers that are out there, Bill Hall bumps a little bit ahead. So, you know, really it's kind of Hall and Davis. You know, I think if you're comparing Davis and Lake, it's about a wash, you know, depending upon what you prioritize, but similar shapes. Bill Hall is going to give you more power. That's his big thing. You know, defensively, again, you get this extra range, and that's kind of worth the rest of it. So you're getting a little bit better glove from Bill Hall, although kind of an imbalanced shape. And you're getting more power from Hall, but more eye from Davis. Overall, Hall comes out a little bit ahead, but Davis is very close. And in an earlier era tournament where that power gets suppressed a little bit, then I think you'd prefer George Davis. So I think Davis is very much going to be in the mix. Another nice thing with Hall is Hall plays third, Hall plays short, Hall even plays center, albeit poorly. He's eligible at a couple other positions. So this Bill Hall card is much better for building lineups. And I think that's another reason to prefer the card. But Davis is very much in the mix. So I don't think this is essential, but this is an A-tier card because it's the best of its type. So that one's going to be pretty viable. All right, let's keep saying we're going to speed this up. We're going to try. Let's go on to the outfield. So here, we can speed it up a little bit because we already looked at Lance Berkman as the bronze card and realized that that's, you know, a critical first base option. So let's look at the silver Lance Berkman. All right, when we see here, now, of course, the card is really, really splitty. 51 more points of eye versus right than versus left is the big thing, but also you've got 19 more points of power, so those are your two most important ratings. Okay, technically he can play all three outfield positions because he's qualified at center. You really don't want him seeing the outfield. This is a first baseman or a DH, and the problem as a first baseman, is simply that you're back up against that David Ortiz that we saw before, as well as cards like the Eddie Murray or John Jaha. So yeah, 116 I is enormous, but if you look at this as, well, for example, let's say you even look at him as an outfielder, compare him with this Jeff Burroughs card. And, you know, overall, of course, Burroughs is just better across the board, but they're not that dissimilar versus righties even, whereas Burroughs is a two-way player. And if you start to think about and Burroughs actually, yeah, and if you start to think about Berkman as a first baseman and you compare him with Ortiz, well, as we saw before, that one's just not going to be close. here's that comparison. So yes, Ortiz has more eye, but all this extra power is still going to end up outweighing everything. Yeah, so is he a DH option? I think if you're looking at Berkman, first off, if you're looking at Berkman and you're going to DH him, that means you're having to platoon a DH who doesn't really back up anything else. So that's a bit of a roster construction problem. You know, if you're going to run, let's say, 12 pitchers, and in some of the metas I'm even running 13 right now, but if you're running 12 pitchers, that means you get 5 backups. And that means those 5 backups have to cover, 9 positions. So ideally, you want all of your guys to be able to start one way and back up 2 positions, say, other than your catcher. So the problem with Berkman is if you're running him as a DH, he's essentially a DH, but you probably are not going to be comfortable letting him back up any of these outfield positions. And so that means the bat has to be sort of that much better than it would have been otherwise. So I think that's going to be the big problem. But with that said, give me a moment. Let me just take a look at where he would rank as a DH versus righties in silver. I should have run that before, but I'll just run it now while we're here. Okay, yeah. So if you think about Berkman, okay, actually that's not bad. So if we run Berkman just as a one-way DH, then he does end up second behind Ortiz, right, and ahead of that Burrows card that we just saw. So I think if you're willing to give a roster spot to a one-way DH, then probably Berkman is a good option. And the more righties that are in the meta, the better that's kind of worth looking at. In fact, what this is saying is if you're really just running him versus righties, one of the things to consider is there aren't a lot of great right field options right now. And so you could even consider trying to let him stand in right field. As bad as that's going to be defensively, you could almost consider letting him try to stand in right field. Dern makes a good point. If he faces a lefty, he's just dead. So I still think probably it's just a little bit too hard in terms of roster construction to want to play a card that's this splitty and is primarily a DH. So I don't think I would do it, but I do think the bat's good enough that you'd have to consider it. So okay, so maybe then this is like a B tier card. There are scenarios where you can run him. I don't think you're going to see him in my builds just because I think I need more than that out of someone that's going to take up a roster spot just to be able to build a depth chart. So you got faster as a 35-year-old. Well, let's see. Hold on. So running speed 21. Is that faster than he was? Let me do the comparison. Faster to 35-year-old and he's faster in the bronze, which is, let's see, the bronze is 2009, and sorry, what year was? He's slower. He is slower as He was none of these cards is fast. Although I still claim Ortiz was safe stealing second in the playoffs. You know. All right, let's move on then. What do we got next here? We've got center field in Beltran. Or hold on, the bronze does not actually play center. Is that right? The bronze is actually not eligible at center. That's why I can't find him. What am I missing? All right. Am I just doing something stupid? He's listed as a right fielder. That's where he is. Okay. Sorry about that. Try that again. Okay. All right. Think we're good now. So this bronze Beltran, listed as our right fielder instead. So is this card viable? Unfortunately, I think this is just the wrong shape. So anytime in the current meta where it's kind of, difficult to score just with balls in play, you've got to be able to do at least 2 of 3 things well, I think, to be viable. You got to walk, you got to hit home runs, you got to play defense. And this card, kind of is okay on the home runs, but just doesn't do either of the other 2. So, all of the options that are going to really be viable in right field at this point. Well, you could even play the live Joey Gallo there, potentially. If you're really trying to kind of match righties, you could play DeRosa there, Rob Deere, Fukudome. But kind of what all of these cards have in common is, they're cards that go close to 3 for 3 in terms of eye power and defense. Certainly there are cards that go at least like 2.5 out of 3. And unfortunately this card just doesn't. So I think this one, probably not too much to say, just isn't going to be viable. So let's look at the Kansas City version from 2003 instead. And this one doesn't even really run. So all right, let's look at the Kansas City version in silver instead. So this now becomes a little bit more interesting. So 82 range in center is kind of at least passable. The eye is now at least passable. The power is kind of passable. So this at least starts to be more the kind of card that we look at. The problem is it doesn't do any of these things particularly well. And so the kind of card that we'd want to compare it to in center. Okay, so one option, if you want to compare it to a card that's just going to be a huge bat, we could run Shin-Soo Choo. And this is just Beltran with like 43 more points of eye in return for losing some glove, but you're actually only losing 8 points of range here, and you're losing some arm. Where's the break even on defense? I don't think it's as much that there's a break even. Every point is useful. So one way you could think about it, like rough heuristic, 1 point of outfield range is like order of magnitude. That's one like ball that they get to or don't get to per season in the league. So, the difference between, Beltran and Choo, 8 points of range basically means Beltran's tracking down 8 more fly balls. And when you're talking about a center fielder, a fly ball that they don't catch is going to be a double or triple, which is worth more than a run. So those 8 points of range are probably going to be worth something like 10 to 12 runs per season, or a little bit over a win. So if you're then kind of asking, what is that worth in terms of the offense? I think all the I that you're getting out of Chu is still going to be more valuable than that. But at the same time, Chu could DH because you're really playing him for his bat. And this Beltran, in addition to the range, he does also give you some base running value. Chu's not bad on the bases, but Beltran is better. So overall, if you try to value these two together, Chu comes out something like a little over 2 runs better with the bat. Beltran's a little bit over, 2 wins better with the bat. Beltran, as we just mentioned, is a bit over a win better with the glove, plus a little better base running. So in the end, I get Chu coming out about 3/4 of a win ahead of Beltran. So if you had to play one, you'd play Chu, but you don't actually have to play only one, because Chu's bat is close to good enough to DH in some circumstances. So you could find ways to put both on the roster. It would be really nice if, they had more ratings. So like Chu, for example, you can stick the bat in left. Beltran, unfortunately, you can't stick anywhere else. And that makes it a little bit tougher putting a roster together with them. I think of the two, I'd still be playing Chu at this point. But this Beltran is very much at least viable. He's probably the second best center fielder right now in the current Silver setup. And if we were to go to an environment that had a little bit higher BABIP, so the value of that defense would go up and the value of Chu's walks would go down a bit, then he might become the best center fielder. Or if you just kind of decide that you want to run a defense-heavy build. So I think we'll give him an A-tier card. I think this is a nice card, and you also still get the advantages of being a switch hitter. Even if Beltran is kind of relatively flat in terms of a profile, just the fact that he's a switch hitter also means the pitcher's always on their weaker side as well. So you get some added value there. All right, and we got one more position player, right? We got Reggie Smith. So on to right field. And hold on. That's right, because he's not listed as a, what is he listed as? He's listed as a first baseman. All right, here we go. So Reggie Smith, listed as a first baseman, only plays first base, doesn't play it particularly well. So if we look at the bat, we got some power, but not a lot else. And if we compare this to some of the cards that are like power and I that we were looking at before, this really just isn't even in the same ballpark. So yeah, I'll just pull one of them up for comparison. Like we're looking at this Gallo or something. These bats aren't even anywhere close. And so I think Reggie Smith, as a guy who can only play first base, doesn't have a bat. There's not too much to say. This is just not a viable card, and there's no path for it being viable as a first baseman. So let's look at the other one. Let's look at the Silver Reggie instead and see if that one works out a bit better. That's listed as a center fielder. Where is he? Listed as a center fielder, but can also play right. You get a little base running value. Kind kind of funny splits. So he's got this power versus right, more contact and gap versus left, but doesn't have really any kind of eye versus either. And the problem is just everything he does is significantly behind some of the other cards we looked at. So, for example, we just looked at this Beltron. So here's the comparison. And with the bat, you're getting you are getting 10 more points of power, but in return for 11 points of eye and 11 points of BABIP, and Beltron kind of is going to steal more bases, and Beltron's just a little bit better defensively. So Beltron just kind of does everything better. Oh, nice, you pulled a Reggie Smith. Well, I think all of these cards are going to be viable at some point in the chain. I don't think the bronze one's so playable, unfortunately. And yeah, so the silver one, I think you're going to run into the same problem. That this card just is a little bit understated compared with an option like Berkman. So on the other hand, there are two nice things about this card. One is it does. This is also a card that can play right field reasonably well. Now the problem is that in tournaments, because Berkman, this 0 is not going to get trained up, right? He's eligible, but in tournaments, Berkman's not going to be fully trained in right, whereas Smith is. And on the other hand, Reggie Smith has the other advantage that because he's 72 overall, he's going to be a better cap card. And so I think really what we're asking is, can we play this card in right? That's going to be our best shot. So the problem with playing him in right is that there happen to be a couple of low silvers that just have much better profiles with the bat. So for example, this Bernie Carbo, you're basically trading some contact for more power and 40 more points of eye. And as we've kind of discussed with all the other players in the current meta right now, Carbo just comes out way ahead for that trade. So Carbo is going to be like almost 50 points of WOBA better than Reggie Smith. Another option, which I don't think I have here, but I can put it up in the card shop. We've also got, I do have him here. Okay, we've also got this Larry Walker, where again you're getting a lot more eye, a lot more power. Not as good defensively. So the problem is that Reggie Smith, even against these low silvers, I think is going to come out not that far behind. He's probably in that next tier, and he's about as good as Berkman would be in right. So he's worth taking a look at, but this is still going to be like a B tier card because I think you'd rather Walker or Carbo. And you certainly would rather somebody else in center. Okay, so what do we got left? We got pitchers. All right, let's take a look at pitchers. What we got? All right, Robin Roberts. So this is the kind of card that you might expect to be viable just because of the pitcher BABIP alone. Sorry, I'm thinking of the silver. Let's start with this one, right? So what do we got here? We've got, surprisingly enough, almost a completely flat card. So we got a starter, good enough stamina. 57 hold runners is pretty good for a righty. Throws 3 pitches, so he'll get a little bit better out of the bullpen, dropping that fastball. 69 on the PBABIP is lower than what people are running in the current bronze. There's nothing he does, really poorly here, but at the same time, there just isn't any like key feature that makes this card work. So for example, I'll just run a couple comparisons here. So one card that that's a lot in the current meta is going to be this Dave McNally. And so if we kind of compare the two, a little bit more stuff for McNally, a few more points of movement for Roberts. We got 11 more points of control for McNally. And those points of control are worth a lot more than the gap in movement. But then, I see, pitcher BABIP doesn't show up on the comparison thing. That's unfortunate. But McNally also has 102 versus lefties and 97 versus righties in pitcher BABIP. And that's the big difference in the current meta, is you're getting almost a comparable card, but with like 40 more points of pitcher BABIP. And I think that kind of problem is really going to be the reason this card doesn't work. Let me give you another example. I'll give you a card that has a more similar shape to Roberts. Is this Orel Hershiser. And the problem is, if you just put these cards up against each other, Orel just does everything better. And that's even the stuff you can see here, that Orel does everything better. And then you go back and you look at the pitcher BABIP, and Hershiser is at 88 and 86, whereas Roberts was in the 60s. So I don't think the bronze Roberts is at all going to be playable here. But let's take a look at the silver, because the silver is a lot more interesting. And the silver, well, first off, let's look at the ratings here. So we got 79 stuff, flat. Okay. Movements, we've actually got reverse splits, which is another nice feature because, as a righty, you expect him to see more lefties. He's got 93 and 95 on the pitcher BABIP, 101 and 108 on the control. So if we think about what this card's going to run up against, this is a card that's going to stop even these really high I guys from getting so many walks. This is a card that's going to stop you from getting singles when you get the ball in play against him. He's going to strike out even a few of these guys with really low avoid K. So the only way you can attack this card is that he's going to give up a lot of home runs. But he's incredibly good at everything else. He's by far the best combination of everything else, not just in silver, but I believe he's the best combination of everything else in diamond. I think to get a better combination than this, you're looking like an Addy Joss or something. So the key question is, how many home runs is this card really going to give up? And is it going to be so many home runs that you can't really play him? As best I can tell from kind of running the models, the answer is he is going to give up a bunch of home runs, but there are going to be a lot of solo shots, and everything else about the card is so good that, first off, this ends up simply being the best silver starting pitcher right now, and by an enormous amount. Against the kind of extreme profile hitters that we've been talking about on the stream, he ends up something like 0.6 of a run better in expected ERA than any other silver starter. In fact, this ends up being the best gold starter against that set. And if you take this card to dead ball tournaments where the home runs are going to be suppressed, think about some of the tournaments. We've got a bunch of cap tournaments where they're set in 1919 or 1933 or 1921. Think about this card in 1919 when nobody's hitting home runs against him. And this is potentially the best card in the game. So I think out of all the cards we've talked about, this is the absolute S tier one. This is the one that you really want to make sure you find a way to get this build lineup. I think all the other ones we've talked about so far, if you had to skip them for a while, you could. It would be nice to have Chipper. It would be nice to have George Davis. It would be nice to have, Berkman or Murray. But I think this is the card that if you prioritize doing one build a lineup first, I think this is the one to prioritize. And this is one where when we go build our Tourney Lab build in a moment, I'm pretty sure we're going to be finding a way to get this guy into the Tourney Lab as well. So, all right, let's go on. What about our other starter here? So we've also got Mickey Lolich. That's right. The bronze Mickey is actually listed as a reliever, right? Hold on. Yeah, the bronze Lolich is listed as a reliever. So here's the bronze Lolich. Now, Lolich, yeah, they put Lolich in the mission for a while. Right, so the bronze Lolich, so very splitty card. Certainly against lefties, this 103 pitcher BABIP and 92 home run suppression, that combination looks wonderful. The problem is that kind of the control isn't there. And I think one of the things to think about is if the goal is to suppress base runners, if that's kind of your overall plan, I think we want to be thinking about pitcher BABIP and control kind of as a combination. If you have a really high pitcher BABIP but really low control, you give up the runners via walks. If you have a really high control but low pitcher BABIP, you give them up via hits. And so if you have a guy with sort of, if the idea is you're trying to prevent runs by keeping the ball in the ballpark and then just, knocking down all of the hits, you really need a combination of, high in all three of the home run prevention, pitcher BABIP, and control. That just two of the three is not enough unless you either have some stuff or it's sort of Robin Roberts like, on such incredible lockdown that the home runs are all solo shots anyway. Robin Roberts can give up 2 home runs a game and be okay because they're both solo shots. He doesn't give up anything else. So Lolich, here, this just isn't going to be all that close of a combination. Let me see if I can come up with an example of, someone that'll be comparable. All right, here, to give you an idea of like where we would go down a little bit. Sorry, that's the wrong, one sec, that's the wrong card. Sorry, one sec, got to rerun that again. Yeah, I could pull up Rasmussen. Yeah, I'm not playing Rasmussen either, but that might be one. I realized I had a tool that gives me a very similar profile, so I was just gonna pull it up. But sure, let's pull up a Rasmussen. Oh, am I on? I may not have him. Well, here you go. So you can see that I am not playing Rasmussen either. But yeah, this is a card with a similar profile, but ends up a little bit better, I think. Splitty the other way. But I think even if you just look at, like what, so if you just look at what Lolich is going to do versus lefties. So I will say as a lefty, as a lefty matchup guy, technically Lolich does come out second in the model. But I want to qualify that in a couple of ways. First off, the card that he's approximately tied with is this Wilbur Wood. But the difference is that Wilbur Wood can also face righties. So that's the first big difference, is that you're much happier letting Wilbur Wood face righties. And especially with a reliever in the late innings, you should expect that you're going to see them in their bad matchup a lot of the time. But then the second thing is, the card that he's behind as a lefty matchup guy, he's like 1.2 runs of FIP behind or something. So if you really want to consider a lefty matchup guy, here's your lefty matchup guy. Is this Will McEnany. You get 122 movement versus lefties. You get 105 control. It's not shown here, but you're still getting 79 on the pitcher BABIP. So I just don't see this Lolich card being viable. Maybe the fact that you can kind of use him as a second lefty matchup guy maybe will give him like a C tier or something, but I don't think this card's going to be viable. So let's look at the other Lolich. Let's look at the silver. Okay, so here we have these funny splits again, particularly in terms of control. We have this funny kind of reverse split, and I think again the problem is just this is just understated compared with everyone that's in that current meta. So let's see, Warbot has him about 25th in terms of silver starters. But even if you want, especially this 48 homer suppression versus righties is going to get him clobbered, I think. So yeah, I think that's going to be a problem for sure. But then even just generally, let me find somebody with a similar. Yeah, like if you want to look at a card that sort of similarly is like stuff and control and low home run suppression, but has some pitcher BABIP. You could compare him with a card like this Frank Tanana, where you get a lot more pitcher BABIP, you get a lot more stuff, and similar home run suppression versus righties, which is most of what he's going to see. So yeah, I think the silver Lolich really just is unplayable here. We'll give him a D tier because you can kind of use him as a matchup guy a little bit, but if you're going for one of the starters here, it's the Robin Roberts that you want for sure. All right, finally we got some relievers. So let's finish up some relievers here. So we got Gary Lavelle. And this is kind of an interesting card because I feel like this is a bit of a trap card, honestly. You look at the card and it immediately looks like it should fit in the current meta. Why? Well, so, he can suppress some homers a little bit. He has a ton of pitcher BABIP. He has, it's a lefty. It's a lefty who is suppressing right-handed homers. So you're more thinking about kind of the right-handed side of this if you're thinking of it as a late inning guy. So he suppresses right-hand homers well. He's got good BABIP, pitcher BABIP, and excellent pitcher BABIP, particularly against lefties. The stuff is fine, particularly against lefties. What he doesn't have is control. And I think this is one where I was a little bit surprised to see how the model came out, because it's been a really pitcher BABIP heavy meta. And like when I'm doing perfect drafts, I'm also drafting pitcher BABIP heavy guys and just using that as a quick heuristic. And seeing how this card graded out was really useful, I think, for me to figure out kind of the relative values of this. Because what we ended up finding is that even as a matchup guy, even just against lefties where he's got 105 pitcher BABIP, this just isn't that good of a card because of all of the walks. So like if you looked at that Will McEnany earlier, Will McEnany is going to walk like 1 batter per 9. This is going to walk like 6.5. And that's going to be a huge difference when you consider it's a card that still is going to give up some home runs. I think the thing to keep in mind is that pitcher BABIP, as I was just saying, it's part of a pair. What you really care about in terms of how many base runners you're going to allow is the combination of pitcher BABIP and control. And if you have a really high pitcher BABIP but no control, it just means you're giving the base runners via walks rather than via hits, which in some ways is even more dangerous in the current meta because everybody's running batters with huge I and low BABIP. So unfortunately, the combination means this just is not a viable card. It looks like it should be. I could imagine metas where it becomes viable, but I think at the moment it's really a trap card where it looks like it should be playable. I saw that this was one of the more expensive cards initially in the market, so I think a lot of managers looked at that pitcher BABIP and said, this is a card we want to try. But I suspect the managers that are doing that are going to change their mind pretty quickly when they see how many walks he gives up. So if we then look at the silver version of Lavelle, well, that's actually a card with kind of the opposite problem. So now we've got a card that prevents a ton of home runs, so great at that. Again, control versus lefty, but no control versus righty, but also no pitcher BABIP. And so now this is a card that just is going to give up walks and singles and get hammered. He won't give up homers, but you can score on this card without giving up homers because everything else is just going to be so much trouble. So I think this one's also just not playable. Which finally leaves us to Kenley Jansen. So, all right, one last build a lineup to go. And this is potentially an interesting one. So let's start with the bronze. So this bronze card, this combination of pitcher, BABIP, and control is kind of unique for bronze, and he does have stuff as well. What he obviously does not have is home run suppression. He's 28 home run suppression versus righties, 35 versus lefties. So yeah, this card is going to give up some bombs. On the other hand, the combination of everything else in preventing base runners is unique, and the stuff starts to play a bit against the low avoid K cards in bronze. So the combination still ended up grading out surprisingly well. I think this card may well give up. Actually, I can run some numbers, but I suspect this is a card that's going to give up close to 2 home runs per 9 or something, maybe even over that. All right. Give me a sec. I'll actually give you a number on that. Okay, so yeah, so against some of the really high home run bats that we're seeing in bronze, because we are looking at bats like that Gallo, that we were just looking at. this is going to give up something like almost 2.5 home runs per 9, which is an enormous number. The thing is, they're going to be mostly solo shots. And even with that, the card ends up grading out as the 4th best overall relief pitcher in the, currently in bronze, as well as a card that's going to, be a little bit cheaper for caps and things like that. So despite the flaws with the card, well, I should say the flaws with the card. There's one flaw with the card. It's the home run prevention. Everything else is incredible for a bronze. This is a card I think is very playable. I've got this card in my bullpen, and I'm seeing this as an A-tier card. Yeah, I think, Stratico, I think I sort of am talking you into Kenley. He's going to give up bombs, so, you got to be aware of that. I'm a Red Sox fan, so I think I'm now in for the Kenley experience. But, yeah, he's going to give up bombs, but everything else about preventing base runners is the best in bronze. This is basically the equivalent of what we saw with the Robin Roberts. Roberts is a silver, so Roberts has, more control and another, has 20 more points of control and 20 more points of home run prevention. And if this card had both, But here's the thing. So I said A tier, but then you have to remember that we have all of these dead ball or, early era cap tournaments. And in all of these early era cap tournaments, this is going to be a much more valuable card, because in 1919, you don't care so much about the home run prevention. And because of that, I think we actually got to bump this up a little bit to like an A+ tier, because in a cap tournament, this card is going to be absolutely excellent in an early era. If you're running one bullpen guy in 1933, this could be your one bullpen guy. Is there a setting that keeps him coming to the inning with runners on? I don't think there is a setting that forces a clean inning. And you do need to worry a little bit about the base runners. 41 hold runners is not bad for a righty. So control matters in that environment. But remember that what you're getting at, so the reason we think about control as mattering a lot in the early eras is from 23, where you think about pitchers as controlling 3 true outcomes. So stuff, gives you strikeouts, movement gives you home run prevention, and control gives you walk prevention. But in very early eras, there are almost no strikeouts, there are almost no home runs, but there are still walks, and so the only rating that mattered was control. The other two just got suppressed. But now there are 2 ratings that matter. There's control and there's pitcher BABIP. And it's really the combination of those 2 that you care about in that environment, not just the one alone. In fact, pitcher BABIP's more important in an environment where there aren't strikeouts or home runs, simply because more balls get hit in play. So, I think if you're asking, would we rather this card, have more control and no stuff? Absolutely. If this card had 90 control and 20 stuff, it would be an even better dead ball card. But this pitcher BABIP is good enough combined with the control that this should be an excellent BABIP, an excellent dead ball card, I would expect. All right, so that's the silver. Sorry, that's the bronze. And finally, let's look at the silver version of this card. And so now this version of the card is kind of the opposite. You still have a similar stuff. You have even more pitcher BABIP. You have a ton of home run suppression, particularly versus righties, but no control. And so first off, this is the one that's definitely not a dead ball card. Let's start with that. The complete lack of control really is going to hurt you too much to try to make this a dead ball card. As for kind of in a more modern silver, as for more modern silver, it seems like in combination this is such extremely good movement and such extremely good pitcher BABIP that probably this card can get away with the lack of control and should be in your silver bullpens. This is a different kind of scary experience from the ones that we saw. This card still ranks a little bit behind, say, the Wilbur Wood we saw earlier, who has a better combination and sort of has everything but stuff, which works well in the current meta. You know, his stuff is getting a little bit wasted, and you'd much rather some of that stuff be control. But this still grades out as, I mean, it's funny because this card is also one in particular where so much of the value is coming from this pitcher BABIP that if you run this card, you have to be willing to ignore some of the statistics. And I know that's a funny way to say it for a statistics-based sim. But so I'll explain what I mean by that. When I look at how my pitchers are doing, let's say I look at my pitchers sorted by WAR here for this tournament. Where that WAR is coming from, or sorry, there's the league, but you know, where that WAR is coming from is from FIP. So they're essentially saying, pretend they had average defense, how well should they have prevented runs, and therefore, what WAR did we give them? So to give you an idea of you know, what I mean by that, you know, I've got a couple guys here. Yeah, so, you know, my Tiant, 194 ERA, you know, but they're saying, well, he was sort of getting lucky. Whereas on the other hand, you know, Newsom, 456 ERA, ends up with a slightly higher WAR. You know, a few more innings, but mainly because the argument is that, you know, Tiant got very lucky with balls in play and Newsom got very unlucky, at least by comparison. The thing is, all of this is done assuming, like kind of the defensive independent pitching stuff was developed. It's assuming that pitchers have no control over what happens to balls in play. Well, if we look at Tiant, he's got 100 pitcher BABIP. So you'd actually kind of expect him to be lucky and have sort of a lower batting average on balls in play. And if we look at Bobo, he's a little bit lower. He's at 74, and his BABIP is higher. So the way that FIP is calculated assumes that pitcher BABIP is not a skill. And similarly, the way that WAR is being calculated in OOTP is assuming the same thing. Yeah, Stratico, so there should be a larger split between ERA and FIP this year, I agree. But more importantly, in the past, you would expect that that split was primarily random. And this year, there are going to be pitchers with durable splits. Because FIP assumes pitcher BABIP is not a skill, it means that pitchers with very high pitcher BABIP should have an ERA below their FIP, and ones with very low pitcher BABIP should have an ERA above their FIP. And so that means that, so this Kenley that we were just looking at, in particular, so much of his value comes from this pitcher BABIP. Right now, I'm projecting him in the long run to have an ERA in tournaments over 1 run below his FIP. And that actually is part of the current model. That ERA and that FIP no longer in the long run will kind of give you the same thing as ERA. There is a difference because FIP is calculated ignoring pitcher BABIP. And so I think what that means is if you look at Kenley's FIP and WAR, you are going to conclude this is not a playable card. But the projections I've got say that if you look at his ERA, this will be an A-tier card in the silver meta, and that both versions of this Kenley are currently playable. I would be a little bit more worried about playing this card in a dead ball format. In a dead ball era type thing, I would rather play the bronze Even in an open like 1919, I'd rather play the bronze Kenley than the silver. But, but it's possible. It's possible that if this kind of is the way it progresses, it's possible that both Roberts and Kenley are going to be absolutely dominant if they have, eventually perfect card versions of this. Because there have been some Robin Roberts that already were, big control cards. Like the one in 23 was excellent, particularly for dead ball stuff. So, let's see. Is there an official OOTP stream on Saturdays? I don't remember. Does anyone remember the current schedule? I know usually when things get going, there's a Friday night for the showdown, and then there's a Sunday night Perfect League. And there was no showdown this week, and I guess the Perfect League doesn't exist yet, so I don't think there's a Sunday finals. I think Rich was doing a stream Saturday last time, but I don't remember whether that's always a scheduled slot. I don't know. Does anyone else in chat happen to remember? Should you look at something different like Sierra? Oh, that's right. Yeah, Alex will do backyard baseball eventually. All right, thank you, EVC. Okay, so Rich is going to be doing Sunday and Monday nights. But the schedule shows a stream tonight. Okay. Well, I don't know the answer, but it sounds like chat has a better answer here. And yeah, once Alex starts up backyard baseball, that's definitely worth watching. Let's see. Should we look at something different like a Sierra or... I'm not sure. What I've tried to do... So the way I did this for my internal model is I first calculate FIP, and then I try to kind of take the linear weights of the extra hits that are being taken away by the pitcher BABIP, subtract those off, and kind of get an adjusted version of FIP that tries to predict ERA. And as I was mentioning earlier in the stream, the fact that the linear weights should be expected to change a lot in a very low pitcher BABIP environment, might actually mean that, I'm doing these projections wrong, because it's not clear that you can really use the same linear weights. That if I have a lineup full of Joey Gallos, then maybe the marginal version of a single is different than if I combine Joey Gallo with a lineup of 8 average major leaguers. Okay, let's see. But yeah, it would be great if you could actually pull the bronzes. Well, at a minimum, you got hopefully 5 extra packs here. I'm pretty sure we've been long enough on stream that everyone should have been able to get their 5 packs. So before we wrap up, I did just want to do one more plug for the Tournament Lab, unless that's already started. All right, good. We got 25 minutes, which is good because actually I'm pretty sure I haven't built a team for this yet. So I probably should build one anyway. That 94 Ducheur is a good card, though. Yeah, Ducheur is a pretty playable card. All right, I probably have a build from last week, and it's probably not any good. All right, let's take a shot at building this. Let's take a shot at building this real quick, and then we'll wrap up the stream. I already have way too many builds here, apparently. Yeah, I think Ducheur, I have to check. I think he was something like second or third on my low diamond reliever rankings. All right, so let's take a quick shot at building this. So what are we going to do here? So we get, so the minimum here is bronze. It's a silver cap. but we only get 140 points to play with. So with 140 points to play with, that means we can have essentially 7 max value players. Dukeshire, is that? All right, hold on. Actually, you know what I should do? Give me a second. I had a pronunciation guide that I pulled up. I think Baseball Reference has a pronunciation guide, doesn't it? Dukeshire, yeah. Dukeshire is the one they give. Good. All right. You learn something every stream. So all right, Dukeshire, and definitely a very good player. So all right, let's we get 7. I'm thinking, and this is modern era, right? Okay, modern era cap. So sure, let's take a shot at this. We'll build one, see how it goes. You can all see what we're running, and then figure out how to beat it. So all right, let me pull up a model here. First off, all right, so we're going to run 5 starters. I think, let's begin with that. We're going to run 5 starters. I think we're clearly running Robin Roberts for all the reasons we just discussed on stream. I think we also want to try to run some relatively high stamina guys because this is a low cap. So I think I'm going to be willing to try paying up a little bit. Yeah, I think the strategy is going to be we're going to pay up a little bit for the starters because there happen to be a lot of low bronzes that are really efficient on the batting side. So I think we're going to be willing to pay up a little bit for the starters and see how that goes. As long as they've also got high stamina. So I think with that in mind, let's also run Frank Tanana. We've got 94 stamina. We still got 87 pitcher BABIP, 73 control, but also big stuff to kind of take advantage of some of the cards like Gallo or Jimmy Wynn that we expect to be up against. All right, we're going to run Dave McNally. Again, same kind of profile we just talked about. He doesn't have the stuff, which is why he's down at, kind of a low bronze. But for that price, I think it's going to be hard to beat him. And then we've got a bit of a decision. So, one thing we can do is we can still pay up a bit for some of the really good options here. So, one example that we could pay up for a bit is this Bobby Shantz. You got 85 control, 85 pitcher BABIP, 95 stamina. Yeah, I think let's just do that. Let's be willing to pay for some pitching. And let's see, Candelaria is an option. The live Tristan McKenzie is pretty playable. The tournament, let's see. We could go with like the tournament edition Freddie Garcia. Or alternatively, if we want to save a little bit, yeah, let's go a little bit cheaper here. So if we want to save a little bit, our options, could be something like this Jimmy Key, to save a little bit. There's this Chris Paddock. So here's the comparison. Both of them have a pretty good amount of pitcher BABIP as well. I don't know. I'll let chat pick. Which would you go with? Yeah, McKenzie should be pretty good, but I don't think we want to pay 79 points for a guy with only 91 stamina. I'm sorry, for a guy with only 71 stamina in a tight cap because we're just not going to get enough innings out of him. Which I guess actually is the answer here. Yeah, why don't we go with Jimmy Key because of the stamina? All right, so we'll go Jimmy Key. So that'll be our That'll be our starting rotation. Something like this. Could even have gone all lefties into a righty bullpen or something, but I think Robin Roberts is just so good, that we kind of got to do it this way. Let's see. Bullpen we'll come back to. Let's see what we got. Let's see what we got left for points when we get around to the bullpen. So, all right, catchers. So unfortunately, the iron catchers we talked about earlier in the stream that are really good just aren't eligible here. So I think we're looking at Randy Hundley kind of by default for one. And then are we willing to pay for Redmond as a backup, or is there really any other? Yeah, I do like that Silver Tanan. I don't think he'll play in league that long, but I think he's going to play in tournaments quite a while just because of what he does. Against gold cards with all that power, he might struggle. But let's see. I'll come back to the backup catcher. We'll see if we got points. All right, first base, I think we figured out this Ortiz is just worth paying for given how much we get out of it. So I think we definitely want to run Ortiz. We may want to run another of these guys, but we'll kind of come back to it. So second base, Schimpf isn't eligible. He would have been the cheap option. So we're either looking at kind of paying 8 points for DeRosa. There just aren't a lot of second base options, are there? All right, I think we're paying 8 points for DeRosa. I think that's where we're at. Third, then. So I think third, this might be a good place. We were just kind of talking about, where you can save a few of these points. We didn't love any of the high-end third base options. So I think this is a good point to try running the bronze chipper and save a few. Maybe we'll do that. All right, and then shortstop. So again, we didn't love any of the great options. I think we're at least going to run that George Davis as a backup. Then do we want to run? Well, unless we want to run the silver George Davis, in which case we can't. I guess that's the question. Yeah, let's try. Let's try running the silver George Davis, in which case we'll run Bridwell as the backup. So, okay. So then we got, outfield. Well, certainly this Jimmy Wynn is going to make a lot of sense. We're always running Gorman Thomas in this meta as well. Is there anyone else interesting to run? Actually, I guess we have the points. Maybe we could pay up for Chu and make that one of our key cards. So I think we got the points still. And then we need a right fielder. You can never really go wrong with Rob Deere, right? So something like that. So what would that give us? That would give us kind of everything covered. We need a backup catcher. Like a cheap backup catcher. I don't know. Anyone got a really cheap bronze backup catcher they like? You know what? Let's go with Jonah Heim then. You could do Vasquez. Okay, so we need that. What do we need? We now need, well, we need a bullpen. So we need a bullpen. So from our earlier discussion, we're going to run Kenley. Actually, I'll sort the other way because we're going cheap here. Zamora is always going to be runnable for something like this. McEnany would be all the rest of the points. 14 minutes. Oh yeah, we got 14 minutes is plenty. I think we're pretty close here. So we need a few cheap options. So maybe the thing to do, let's do it this way. Let's ask the model who our best options are under 65 points. Let's see what it comes up with. And at least bronze. So as a reminder for anyone who's kind of building along with this, first off, feel free to kind of use or not use anything we're doing here. But also, just as a reminder, there is a bounty. So if you knock us out or a few other teams, you can see this in the Discord, like the main OTP tournament Discord. There are a few bounties. Knock them out and you get 20 standard packs. If you knock out the Millers, Straw Hats, the Binturongs, or us, then you get a bonus of 20 standard packs. So you know exactly what we're running and you can go ahead and try to beat us. Hero Driver, there are going to be bounties in this every week. It might be bounties on a few different people each week, so you'll be able to check that in the tournament Discord. Anyone have a link to the main OTP Discord? So there's a link. There's a link on the main page of OTP. I'll show that if someone was able to post it. Okay, thanks. Yeah, that link should work, but otherwise, yeah. Otherwise, there's also a link I can show you on the main OTP start screen. There's a link to the Discord there as well. So, all right, let's fill in a few relievers, and then we're just gonna hope this works. So, all right, whoops. So all pitchers here, what do we got? So I think we'll run this Edwards. How many more pitchers do we need actually? Okay, we need basically a bullpen full. Okay. Do we think this Don Mossy is too scary to run? He's got pitcher BABIP and he's got control. He may have other issues. Is that one going to be too scary? It might be. All right, we'll run Acevedo, we'll run Vespi, and I think we'll pay 3 points to kind of get a solid option in Paddock. Let's do it that way. And then what do we got? Yeah, maybe Swarzak. That's kind of a solid option. It doesn't have the pitcher BABIP, but all these cards are going to be missing at least one thing for that rating. So yeah, maybe something like that. And then sure, we'll run Flaherty. Okay, so that gives us a bullpen. And then finally, we got 2 more backups. We need a backup, probably a backup outfielder and a backup infielder. And then we'll call that good. And so notice that one thing I'm doing here is trying very hard to make sure that I've got backups at all the positions so that we don't end up with a disaster from the depth chart. So for example, this Don Locke grades out really highly, but I'm not going to run him as a backup because he can only back up center field. I'd rather run, say, Fukudome, who backs up 2 positions for me and makes it much easier to kind of construct something, or Ricky, actually will play all 3. So that might even work better. And similarly for the infielders, I want to find someone that's going to play a bunch of positions. Although, this Dal Maxville, I think I'll just take excellent defense at 2 positions. I think that can work because DeRosa, DeRosa plays there. Yeah, that'll be fine. All right, so and then we just need, and then Fukudome would work. All right, so I think we've got ourselves a plan. So this is our build. We managed to hit the cap. We managed to get a backup at every position. Let's see, something like that. Fukudome is there. I think we're in pretty good shape here. Yeah, so I saw it swap Davis out. Thanks. So I think this is kind of what we want. So something like this, and I think we're in pretty good shape. One other thing I highly recommend in all of your builds is if you put a new player on the roster, this available as pinch hitter if tired, you really want to uncheck this. And so I try to do that, kind of for all of my builds before submitting, because otherwise it will turn off days into non-off days, and that can really mess you up in a long series. So I think that's probably a good point to end the stream. This one fires in a little over 6.5 minutes. So good luck, everyone. Who are we up against, actually? I can see who is up for the bounties. We are up against the San Diego Reapers. So, all right, that works. So the Reapers get the first shot at beating us for a boundary, although, we don't fear the Reapers. And what do we got? The Binturongs. Kasan C2S Red Expla Star. So they are up for a possible bounty in the first round. Who else do we got? Got the Millers. So the big PP package is up for the bounty here. Good luck to them. And then finally, who's the other bounty? Where is... There they are. Assiniboia West Enders. Okay, so we got some strong teams up for the bounty. Good luck to everyone. If we don't win it, I hope you do. And let me see if there's anyone that we can raid. Is there anybody doing kind of an OTP stream that we can raid? Teswigi's got one? All right, well, we can raid Teswigi. All right, well, thanks a lot, everyone. Hopefully this was helpful, and good luck. And I think we'll get this raid to work. And if people like this, we'll try to do this again, maybe with the next set. So thanks a lot, and thanks again to OTP for the drops and all that. We're going to go raid to Swiggy, and thanks a lot, everyone.